Nice to see you again.
The Gulf News is taking a look at three different international attitudes, and obviously what we're aware of when it comes to Syria is the clash in opinion as to what needs to be done next. Just explain how this is looking at it.
Well, the picture says it all, doesn't it? US Navy ships are on their way, and that means also that I think cruise missiles is going to be on the way to Syria, unfortunately. So it is all getting very, very serious. The US is ready. The official decision still needs to be taken, but I think the realities will unfold over the next days and weeks. Cruise missiles are coming. I think the borderline has been crossed in terms of the use of chemical weapons, so there is no turning back from here.
Also as well, Gulf News, it's interesting to see all the different, countries' angles, the press angles on the story. They've got Chuck Hagel there next to the Saudi foreign minister and the Syrian foreign minister, so looking at the world leaders and the different players in this situation and what they're all saying yesterday, obviously today being key as well.
Well, the most explicit have clearly been the US. They're saying we're ready to go. The Arab League say this is very serious, and they remain very firm in their attitude, so that they're being perhaps a little bit softer in their wording, but the attitude is very clear. There is support behind it. You obviously still need to go through the hurdle of passing the UN Security Council, potentially, where Russia can veto this. Whether they will wait for that or not is another matter.
Interesting, the Gulf News actually has made very clear on its front page. It's looking analysis of the attack, if there is one, what Russia will do, Jordan, UK military actions, and of course the impact on the markets, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But interesting what's happened in the UK. Yesterday, David Cameron, the Prime Minister, came back from holiday and recalled, as expected, has recalled Parliament. What's the significance of this?
Well, the main significance is the timing of this, because Parliament is going to be back on Monday anyway, and now they're being called back 4 days before. So there's clearly a strong sense of urgency here. We need to get the approval from a Parliament. Strictly speaking, he doesn't need it, but in reality, after the Iraq wars, it's a very good idea to get that box checked, as it were.
It's interesting that when you look at the view of Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, why people still are questioning how on earth did it come to the point where a chemical attack took place, and the authorities are saying the evidence is pointing more that it was the Syrian authorities. There's some interesting views in some of the papers as well.
Well, it's interesting because the Times has an excellent article about that, saying that he was probably pushed in a corner because there was an attempt on his life, and this was his emotional way of getting back and saying, no way, I'm very angry at you, I'm going to throw chemical weapons. So it was probably an emotional response, the Times article would have it, and that's what pushed him over the border. What he didn't calculate was probably the response, the strong response we've seen so far from the West. He probably thought he could get away with it because at the end of the day, the national interest of the West are not deeply at stake in Syria. What is really at stake here in terms of national interest is when you cross the line in terms of chemical weapons, that becomes a security issue, and that really hits to the heart of natural interest in the West.
Now, as far as markets concerned, they're preparing themselves for what could happen in the next few days. Wall Street Journal and others look at the reaction, usual reaction, shares going down, oil price going up, gold going up, safe havens becoming more attractive for money. But one article in the FT is quite interesting, talking about the impact this might have on the Federal Reserve, for example, in the US. If fuel prices go up, we've got food prices going up, housing prices going up, it could lead to inflation. Therefore, the central bank might have to rethink what it does in the future.
Absolutely. When it comes to the quantitative easing program, and we're sort of heading towards the end of that, this has been communicated very clearly from the Fed. What it might have an impact is it might delay the ending of that, because life is more uncertain, the world is more uncertain, and it will just push the deadline further out, precisely for the reasons that you're saying. But in terms of the market response, absolutely predictable. Emerging market currencies falling, gold up, oil up, and markets down.
Interesting that the Wall Street Journal also comparing the stock market pullback to that happened when the bombing campaign was in Libya in 2011 and the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. So a typical reaction for markets, really.
Absolutely predictable.
Financial Times. Jamie Dimon on the front page again. He is, of course, the man in charge of JP Morgan, and he's been in hot water more often than he'd like to be in recent weeks and months. This headline, JP Morgan's woes deepen as US demands $6 billion penalty. Now, this would be one of the biggest penalties it's had to stomach, wouldn't it, if it does actually pay the penalty. This article says people familiar with the situation are saying that the bank's fighting it. Just tell us what this particular penalty is for, because there's been quite a few and we need to know what they're all about, don't we?
Yeah, it seems like $6 billion seems to be the magic number when you talk about JP Morgan. The London Whale, the big trader who made energy losses, lost $6 billion. And now the US is looking to fine JP Morgan $6 billion for their role in the whole subprime credit bubble and bust. So this is still a fallout of the whole credit crisis that we see here, but in a major way, and this is sort of the biggest fine that we have seen so far.
Okay, so I mean, what do you think this means for JP Morgan? Because clearly it's a big fine if they have to pay it. Again and again, they crop up, don't they, as a bank that's not been behaving well.
No, but there's no news in that sense, because it's been building up. It's the bubble, it's the fallout, and here comes the penalty. What the big headline here is the size of the potential fine. They may end up settling at a lower number, but it certainly will be very significant. So, and even for a big bank like JP Morgan, $6 billion is a lot of money.
The Irish Times is picking up on the fact that the Irish authorities have made numerous requests about Facebook users. Do you think that social media users should be surprised about this?
Not really, because there's been so much talk about whatever you put out there in the public is available. But the numbers are quite interesting. 38,000 people being sort of checked out by governments. I think most of us would probably be surprised about that number. It is a lot of people.
It would make you think that the 38,000 dodgy, for want of a better word.
Well, it might not necessarily be dodgy, but there might be interesting people. So,
but what's interesting as well, though, is
criminals.
They got all these requests, and in 71% of the cases, they actually allowed these governments to look into these Facebook users' activities, which is quite interesting. And
Facebook says that there's a very high legal bar demanding justification for granting access, so maybe they were dodgy.
Who knows? On a global scale, 38,000 is perhaps not so much. But at the end of the day, if you're not comfortable with the information, don't put it out there.
Now, Lost at Sea.
Tell us this story.
Yeah, this is extraordinary. So the Canadian sea cadets come over and don't get lost at sea, but get lost in England, going to complete the wrong place, not just the street.
I can understand that mistake, but no mobile phone, no way of contacting anyone, and I mean a police nationwide search. Is that a bit dramatic?
Because there was a 70-year-old and two 14-year-olds. Yeah. None of which had mobile phones.
Well, you would have thought the 14-year-olds at least had a couple of mobile phones and a few games running at the same time. So it's extraordinary that none of them actually had mobile phones, and therefore the police had to resort to classic tactics of putting out posters.
Bit embarrassing.
Bit embarrassing, but they got home in the end. Pet, always good having you with us. Thanks very much. Sally and I'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.